So when I think of fall and produce, I think of squash. And I love soups and I love squash. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna do a butternut squash soup. I'm using about a 3-pound butternut squash. I'm gonna be using 1 onion, some chicken broth, olive oil, a little bit of ground thyme, and that's about it. Now these can be kind of tough to cut into. We'll see how this one is. But basically you want to make sure that you kind of take the tip of your knife, the point, and stick it in there and kind of get some leverage and get going. Otherwise, if you start like that, it's just going to wobble all over the place. You might lose a finger and that would be bad. So basically you want to cut it in half. Let's see. Probably going to have to turn it over. That wasn't so bad. And then you'll see here, I don't know if you can see, this is where all the seeds are. You want to take a spoon and you just want to scoop those seeds right out. And this should come out pretty easily. Oh, first thing, I preheated my oven to 400 degrees. We need to get that oven nice and hot to cook this squash all the way through because we want it nice and tender when we put it in our soup. I'm just going to scoop those out and see how easy they come out. Okay, so once I've got the seeds cleaned out, I'm going to cut it again in half so that I'm going to have a nice quartered squash. And the reason I'm doing that, the only reason I'm doing that is so that it'll cook faster because we're trying to maximize our time efficiency. We don't want to spend too much time stuck in the kitchen if we don't have to, or waiting for our squash to bake. Again, I'm just going to put the knife in through the middle and bring it down. A lot of muscle. Or break it, that works too. Okay, so now I've got my squash quartered, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna drizzle a little olive oil on there and I'm gonna put them in the oven. And the baking of the squash is actually gonna be what takes the longest for this whole soup preparation. I'm just gonna drizzle some olive oil, a little bit of salt on top. Then I'm just gonna kind of give it a little massage, rub it all in. Make the squash feel good. All right, and that's it. I'm gonna stick it in my oven at 400 degrees, and I'm gonna put it in there for about 40 minutes. What you're gonna do is you're gonna test it with a fork, and if it's nice and tender, that fork just slides right out, then it's done. You might need a little longer time, a little less time, depending on the size of your squash. And I'm gonna clean up while that bakes. It's been in there for about 30 minutes, and I need just about 10 minutes to get everything else ready, which really isn't much at all. I've got a nice big heavy pot, and I'm gonna put some olive oil in there. It's about 2 tablespoons, but really you just kind of wanna line the bottom of your pot. Let me get it heated a little bit first. I'm gonna put that on about a medium high. I'm just gonna let that get a little bit warm before I put the olive oil in there. And I think I only have 2 or 3 more ingredients for this. Onion. I'm just gonna take either a small onion or maybe half of a large onion. This one's pretty small. I'm just gonna give it a nice little chop and stick it in there and let that cook with the olive oil until it gets nice and translucent. It doesn't need to be a real small dice. You wanna cut any more of that kind of papery end off. And just give a few nice cuts through the body there. Okay, so my onion's chopped. My pan's getting nice and hot and crying. Let me get some olive oil in there. And like I said, it's gonna be 2 to 3 tablespoons full. You really just wanna coat the bottom of that pan. Okay, so our oil is ready. I love that sound. Gonna toss them all in there. You wanna make sure you toss from a distance because if any of that oil splashes up on you, it kind of hurts. I'm just going to toss them around, get them nice and soft. Okay, so those are just about ready. And while those finish up, I'm going to go ahead and get my squash out of the oven and get that ready for the soup as well. I'm going to turn this down a little bit because I don't want them to burn. And I'm going to put that on about a medium low. So if you have the numbers, it's about a 3. But I am going to keep stirring them every once in a while just to make sure that they don't burn. Okay, so my squash is perfectly done. You can see the fork just sliding in and out of there. I'm just gonna bring one over, and it's so easy. You can see that the skin just peels right off. Or if you don't feel like peeling like that, you can get your spoon. You can also scoop it right out because it is very, very soft. There we go. It's all in how you angle the spoon, apparently. I think I'm gonna stick the peel in. Okay, so I have all of my squash meat out the peel. We're about 75% done. This soup is so easy. I mean, the cooking takes a little while, about 40-45 minutes for the baking of the squash, but other than that, it's a piece of cake. Let's get this squash in here with the onions. And you don't have to chop it up. We're basically gonna take an immersion blender and blend it all up. Okay, so I've just put my squash in here and I'm just mixing it around with the onions and kind of chopping it down a little bit. I'm turning my heat back up now to about a medium high, so about a 7 if you have the 1 to 10 dial. I'm just gonna let that kind of incorporate together. And now I'm just gonna add chicken broth. And actually, I'm just gonna add water and the chicken broth granules. I really like those because it's easy to measure out how much you need exactly. They don't go bad. Sometimes with the little bouillon cubes, you have to mash them down. If you have homemade chicken stock, even better. If you're a busy mom, sometimes you don't have time to do that because it does take a while to get that done. Get this pan out of the way. And I'm gonna use 4 to 5 cups of water. What you wanna do is just cover that squash a little bit. And for every cup of water you use, you're gonna use about a teaspoon of the chicken granules. The squash was a little smaller than the ones I usually use. Okay, now I'm gonna turn that up to a high. I'm gonna go ahead and add my little granules here. And since I use 3 cups of water, I'm gonna put 3 teaspoons of these. 3. And I like to do them heapings just so it can have a little extra flavor. And get that nice and mixed in. What we're gonna do is we're gonna bring this to a boil and then take our immersion blender and blend it all up until it's nice and silky. We're gonna add a little bit of ground thyme and a little bit of milk. Okay, so my soup is boiling. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it down. And now I'm gonna add my thyme. I'm gonna put in about 3/4 of a teaspoon of thyme. Just pull this off. Okay, so I have a half. You shouldn't need to add any salt to the soup because the chicken granules tend to have a lot of salt in them. But if you want, you can always add a pinch or 2, just depending on what you prefer. Let's give this a nice stir. Boy, that smells so good. Okay. Now I'm gonna grab my immersion blender and zap it all up. And if you don't have one of these, it's a really good investment. Give it a click. You want to start on low, especially with hot liquid. You don't want to put it in there high because you'll get it all over yourself. And you also want to make sure that you are immersing it into the soup because otherwise if it's just kind of at the top, then you can splatter that hot boiling soup all over yourself. And that's not fun. I've done that before. Okay, I think we're done. Okay, so we have it all blended up. The onions and the squash have all kind of become this one really nice, thick, silky soup. Now I'm gonna add about 1/4 cup of milk. And that just kind of gives it that extra creamy, silkiness that you like in soups. It smells so good. Okay, and we're just incorporating it all together and we are just about done. So you see, other than the baking of the squash, the rest of it took about 5 minutes. Maybe a little longer for the onions to cook, but really not much. And if you have some fresh thyme, you could just garnish, put a couple leaves on top just to make it look extra pretty. But you can see how thick and creamy it is. This is such a delicious, nice, hearty soup. It's really gonna warm you up on those cold fall nights. This is so good. It has that nice sweetness that butternut squash has, and that thyme just kind of brings out that flavor and helps develop it. This is a really, really delicious soup. I'm sure you're gonna love it. I do, so definitely give this one a try. When we return, we move from warm and comfy to bold with a kick. You don't want to miss it. We'll be right back.